Imagine a vibrant discussion between people that includes both openness and critical thought in the pursuit of truth. The Purchasing Truth podcast is an experience, a journey, an exploration of the impact that negative messages in politics and the media have on our families, community, society, and nation. Join your hosts, Bill Stierle and Tom Hazard, to discover new concepts and language strategies that will reveal effective ways of establishing truth. This podcast series will tackle current events, leadership challenges, healthcare confusion, integrity in business, and many other areas that affect us all. Gain clarity and understanding of the various truth perspectives. Welcome to Purchasing Truth.
Welcome back to Purchasing Truth. I'm Tom Hazard, along with your host, Bill Stierle. And, Bill, we talked about the Hailstone principle last time, and boy, do we have a lot to try to talk about today, because what we've discovered, you and I, in preparing for this podcast, is that there's also quite a healthy dose of bias that can get injected into the Hailstone principle and impact it. And we're talking about the Derek Chauvin trial over the murder of George Floyd, or the, I guess, accused murder, if you want to be exact, of George Floyd. And, this, as we're recording this, the case is in the jury's hands. Final arguments happened. And Representative Maxine Waters went to Minnesota. Now, she's from California, just to make that clear. She's not from Minnesota, but went to California in solidarity with the protesters, looking for a guilty verdict, hoping for a guilty verdict, and made some statements that then were discussed in the courtroom. And holy mackerel, what a communication mess this is appearing to be.
It is a communication mess. As our listeners may have heard in the past, is the Hailstone principle is when you take a little speck of dust and you coat it with a little bit of water, and then you blow it up into the upper atmosphere, and it freezes. Then it comes down, and then it warms, and then it gets more water, and it freezes again until it's this big hailstone the size of a softball. And this is not a good thing. So one of the biggest challenges that we have, both in politics and in business and our personal life, is to make sure that our messages do not get wind underneath them and be taken the wrong way, and to treat them with a great deal of observation, with a great deal of compassion and empathy, versus start putting the layers of judgment and criticism and defensiveness and contempt and withdrawal on top. That's the layers of language that is currently being put on top of a comment. Now, we can have a discussion about how words can be taken the wrong way, because clearly, what does the wrong way mean? It means that there is a bias or a fallacy or a point of view or a belief that the person is saying, wait a minute, this is my belief and I'm fighting for this belief. You said this, here's the belief part of it. It means that. So you said this, it means that is a confrontation. So it means that is my interpretation is the word confrontation. That's the one that Maxine Waters put in the middle of this. Stay on the street,
make your voices heard,
and be confrontational,
and get more confrontational was the very last part she said, which from a language and messaging perspective is being amplified.
But inside the context, Tom, because you and I listened to the whole clip, her voice tone was level 4, level 5, maybe level 6 at the best. She was not standing at a podium yelling, do this, you've got to fight for this, to a crowd ready to fight. She was to a reporter who says, what should the people do if the verdict does not go their way? stay in the street and be confrontational. So it's very, very unsettling because it's get more confrontational becomes the speck of dust in the middle of a hailstorm that people are going to focus on. Get more confrontational. The word more. Do you see how we're nitpicking this? It's like as soon as we start cutting it up here a little bit, it almost loses energy. It's like the word more and the word confrontational, or trial by combat. Do you see that phrase? That's Rudy Giuliani's phrase. Trial by combat.
Combat.
Now,
yeah.
Is combat more violent than confrontational? I would say it has a little bit more weight to it. The word combat means something a little bit more specific. Confrontational is a little bit less than that. And then the tone is important. He was a level 7 or a level 8, more like a level 8 or 9 in his delivery. She was kind of like, if you look at the tone, she's like a little more, 5 and 6 wasn't the tone. And there was a lot of other words around it that were more.
Well, yeah, and we're going to have that video link in the blog post at purchasingtruth.com for our listeners. Yep. We're not going to play it here, but Maxine Waters, was asked about, the trial and what she was, doing there in Minnesota and all this. And she was talking about, hey, we as a Black community need to continue to stand up. We need to stay on the streets. We need to continue to fight. And she was talking to a collection of media who were around. A collection of different media outlets with microphones. And at first her statement didn't even mention the word confrontational. And it was really talking much like John Lewis would have said in the past, you got to make your voices heard. You got to get in some good trouble, right? And make your voices heard. But then the media continued to press her. They were looking for the soundbite. And I'm not trying to justify what she said, but if you look at the video, you'll see the context.
Right.
She said, we're looking for a guilty verdict. We want to see him convicted of murder. She said, I think he's guilty of first-degree murder, although he's only charged with second-degree murder. We want to see a guilty verdict of murder. The media then presses her and says, what do you think what do you think's going to happen, or something like that? I'm paraphrasing, if he is not found guilty. And then she says, then we need to get more confrontational, was one thing that she said in response to that.
It within 3 sentences, though. It was like,
yeah,
it was there was an explanation around it. Now, our bias, our point of view, our intention with this communication show is to get it to be where we can look at communication from an observational place. And most people don't have the courage to have this conversation that you and I are having right now, which is, how do you take language and use it to benefit us as human beings? How do we take it to have a discussion on the best thing to say and the thing that is not a good thing to say, and be really just honest about that was not something that served the message. Now, probably Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader, will likely try to force a House vote to censure Maxine Waters. Now, if you think about censoring, and is certain comments and phrases does it rise to that thing? Well, for some people, because one side said it should be censored because the other side said it, they get a pass. Well, you gave your side gave your side a pass. We're going to give our person a pass. We're going to make a exception for this language because it doesn't rise to the level of censoring. The only problem what we have is that there's a lot of things that are not rising to the level of censoring and punishment or even impeachment. There, you can have an entire trial about something that would go like, this is, people are not supposed to say or do things in that way, no matter how many votes they get. They're not supposed to say and do things like that. That is not something that is healthy for the nation, healthy for a civil dialogue. And that's the thing that communication wise, we want to keep in the front of our, of our consciousness, because otherwise we are getting into the place where we're not advocating for our highest values. Anyway, so it doesn't make sense then is that if she says you need to be heard, replacing the word confrontational, whatever it takes, stay on the street to be heard. That's the replacement for more confrontational. Make your voices rise and be persistent and stay on the street. So that's the replacement for more confrontational. Now, if a person's used to saying confrontational things and they blurt out another confrontational things, that is just Maxine Waters. That's just Donald Trump. That's just Mitch McConnell. That's just, Ted Cruz. That is just Nancy Pelosi. Do we just move to a place of acceptance that they don't have the languaging skills?
Well, I think we can agree that many of them don't have the languaging skills, or
right.
Don't take the time to consider their words enough and have the self-awareness that it would be nice if they had, so they don't, step on a landmine and self-inflict a wound either on themselves or their cause. But here you have, I think often they clearly don't have the skills and the self-awareness to do that. But how unfortunate is it? And I think, Bill, we have to acknowledge, as a communication show, we have to acknowledge that there is some similarity between a poor choice of words than that little soundbite just about we need to get more confrontational, without the rest of the context that led up to it, without the context of
and the tone.
And she's having just a civil conversation because she's not yelling. You're right. She's not standing from a podium. She is speaking, about at the level I am right now, in a group of reporters who are asking her questions,
and in the middle of people marching and in that situation, not necessarily in the. This is where it's really, really tough, because our bias and our belief structure wants to support, and our identity wants to support the people on our team, the people that are in agreement with our value sets. So, it's very, very challenging to realize how sensitive human beings are to the word, tones, and phrase. And the whole thing about the Hailstone principle is if you keep air and you blowing it up and you put it up there, it just becomes bigger and bigger, and it becomes a thing where really it's not a thing.
Well,
so
and what's really shocking here is that the judge in the Derek Chauvin trial over the death of George Floyd really blew air underneath this speck of dust and shot it up into the atmosphere to make it a bigger hailstone. which is in and of itself pretty shocking. And I would say, well, depends on your perspective, I guess, but surprising, to maybe disheartening. I mean, a
Right.
judge is supposed to be neutral in this.
Right.
The defense attorney brought it up after closing arguments in the courtroom. Now, we don't think the jury was present when these statements were made, so it would not have biased the jury. We hope. I mean, as long as they're really not able to see the news. But that the defense attorney brought it up, and the judge made a comment that I think is completely inappropriate of a judge, because even though the jury is out of the room, and I'm sure he's going to say, well, based on the letter of the law and civil justice procedure, criminal justice procedure, I didn't do anything that was going to taint the jury when I made this comment. But he is on camera, and what he's saying is being broadcast to the nation. And he said to the defense attorney, well, I think Representative Maxine Waters may have just handed you grounds for an appeal. And I'm paraphrasing, but he actually said Maxine Waters' comments may have handed the defense grounds for an appeal. That communicates to the world that the judge thinks what Maxine Waters said was over the line, inappropriate, not helpful, and somehow potentially taints this entire trial. I mean, that I think was very
and the hard part about
surprising.
that, Tom, the hard part about that message is that when somebody has a bias and a belief structure, an identity that's in favor of one point of view or another, the brain is just looking for something to validate its truth, not the truth, its truth. I'm just looking for something. So this thing that's taking place is not so painful to me. I don't have to question the bigger picture. All I need to do is focus on the get out of jail free card, the thing that makes my bias and belief to stay in place. I do not have to re-question my belief. And regrettably, it's more about what the brain is looking at, rather than it. And it does take a bit to, stay in place of observation instead of allowing our beliefs and our biases to influence us, and to say, the judge is saying it, and it may have legal accuracy, but it is not something in this place and time to mention.
I mean, really, I think all it served to do, I mean, I would hope, and I'm always the first to say hope is not a strategy and hope is not a plan. Okay. But I would hope that a judge who is experienced at being a judge would know better than to stay away from making such an unnecessary comment in their own courtroom. And the defense attorney is making a statement. The defense attorney is going to make all kinds of statements. The judge can say, are you making a motion? Are you asking me to act on anything or not? No. Okay. Time to move on, and not make a comment like that isn't material to what's going on in the courtroom. Right. But the judge just revealed his own bias, and now he's given people that are on the team of the police officer and not on the team of the Black community here, or whatever team they're on. He gave people something to cling to, and has now inflamed that soundbite from Maxine Waters to be something more than it was, or more than it was really meant to be, I think.
Yeah. And people look at the phrase and strip away the context from it. And it's one thing to have something that's planned in order to rally a group up, and to say violent things versus someone walking down the street and saying, this is my opinion. And with your question, this is what my opinion is with your question.
I mean, I think she still in that context needs to realize that her words matter and people are going to listen to her and people are going to, rally and may decide to be more confrontational because of what she said. But I agree with you. There's a difference. Like you said, it was maybe level 4 or 5 on the scale of, spoken
violence,
language, violence, and all that. And
especially with the context.
And we have to acknowledge, as you did before, that there is some similarity to what was said in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. But there is a difference. I mean, Rudy Giuliani was one of many speakers. He used trial by combat. President Trump, from the podium in a planned speech that was, planned and amplified and they wanted people to come to the Capitol to help stop the certification of votes, where he's saying, if you've got to fight like hell or you're not going to have a country anymore. I mean, that's a level 8, 9, 10,
right.
Inflammatory statement to call people to action, which when you really look at the context of what Maxine Waters said, it's clearly not the same thing. But we have to acknowledge that the words are going to move people to action regardless, right? In some way.
Yeah. And it depends if it's in this circle of influence or if you have a camera in front of you, which we all do. You can't walk down the street without getting your picture taken by somebody's cell phone. If somebody can look out the window and take a picture, that's how accessible, and put it out to the world instantly. This is why the Hailstone principle is kind of important here, is that you could walk by and be picking up a piece of trash and throw it in the neighbor's trash can off the street. And the neighbor can say, hey, stop putting trash in my can. And we're like, I'm cleaning the street here. So it's like, where does our bias and our perspective look to the worst of what someone's saying versus the best of what somebody's saying? And then also really paying attention to what truth looks like regarding voting or the death of a person. I mean, this is big stuff. So this is a talk that's not going to go away. So I really appreciate our listeners for hanging with this one, because this one's a little tough, because you gotta look to keep your mind in a place of observation and really be compassionate for the loss of life, and also the fight for a person's identity, which is very much a part of a person's bias. So.
Well, Bill, I really appreciate that. I think this is a great example of the Hailstone principle. And I also like that we're not taking too deep a dive in it today, because I think there's a lot more to come on this. And even by the time this podcast publishes, the verdict will have happened in this trial. There's going to be a lot more to talk about. So I think we can pause it until then. And I look forward to continuing that conversation. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for listening to this Purchasing Truth podcast. We trust that you have enjoyed this engaging and thought-provoking conversation. Our hope is that you've received value, found clarity, and broadened your truth perspective in this episode. If you did, leave us a review or visit our website, purchasingtruth.com. Join us again for another informative and content-rich discussion here at the Purchasing Truth podcast. Don't just accept whatever information comes your way. Join the discussion. Discover your own voice. Purchase your own truth.